Hello and welcome to the WriteCome.com podcast, where we help you to make money from your words. Each episode will be sharing tips, tricks, and strategies you can use to make more money from your writing, publishing, and marketing to your fans and audience. Let's get started with your host, Barry J. McDonald.
Hi, this is Barry here, and you are very welcome to this podcast episode from WriteCome.com. And today I want to ask, how much potential do you have? Now, last night I was up in our attic hunting down the Christmas decorations and getting tree and everything. We haven't put anything up yet, but I just was looking for stuff and just getting it all ready. And as happens from time to time, you probably find, when you go up to a space like the attic or the garage or whatever, you come upon stuff you haven't looked at in a long time. And I had come upon some of my old courses and things like that from my MLM days. And one of them was an old audio course by Randy Gage. Now, anyone who has been in MLM at all probably has heard of Randy Gage's name before, especially when it comes to coaching or training. He is probably one of the go-to people, or one of the kind of better people to go to when it comes to coaching. Well, anyway, this old audio course of mine, it was actually that old that I didn't even have it on CDs. It was actually on audio cassettes. So anyone, if you are of that age, you probably know what the cassettes are, and you're probably well aware of what a Walkman is. I don't have to describe that to you, but if you don't, it's a little bit of a personal, or a kind of a personal tape carrier that you can carry around, and you can listen to your cassette tapes as you're walking around. And so lucky enough, I had not only had the audio book, the audio course was still working, but I actually tracked down an old Walkman that was up in one of the boxes, and it was surprised me that it was actually still working. So I slotted a couple of tapes into it, and I've just been listening back to that content from many years ago. But there was one thing that Randy Gage brought up in that audio course when it came to potential. Now, back then he'd been talking about some kind of football coach who was in the NFL, and he was a respected coach. And when it came up to the topic of quarterbacks, he had said of all the teams, now I don't know how many teams are actually in the NFL, but he had said that there is only probably about 5 or 6 quarterbacks in the league that deserve to be there, and everybody else, they are kind of making up the numbers, that they are probably the best quarterbacks that those teams could find or whatever, but that there is only kind of 4 or 5 or 6 quarterbacks that deserve to be in the NFL. Everybody else is just not as talented or doesn't have the potential that those people had. And Ronnie was just saying, further on in that interview, the coach said that he reckoned there was only probably about 100 people in all of the US that could qualify to be, a quarterback on any of these big teams and did have the potential. And Ronnie was just saying that he thought that was a kind of narrow-minded kind of thing, in that it wasn't, looking at the wider pool of people out there. As Randy said, there was a lot of people who could probably qualify to be a pretty good quarterback who were maybe female, or maybe those people who were actually born outside the US who probably had the skills and the talent to go on to be a good quarterback, but because they were born outside the US, they'll probably never ever pick up a football, never ever be involved with American football, and never actually know if they had the potential to be a great quarterback. So as Randy was saying, for people to kind of look, or that coach actually to look at a small kind of pool of people and reckon that is the kind of pinnacle of the crop, and that nobody else can, be at that level, he thought was a little bit small-minded. And unfortunately, sometimes we look at our own selves in the same way. We look at the little bit of skills or talents that we have, and we think that is all we have. We kind of, it's almost like we have these little, if you've ever done bowling before, if you've ever been a learner and gone to a bowling alley, I'm sure you probably have had to put the bumpers up to keep the ball in the lane. But it's almost like we kind of have that kind of mental kind of bumpers in our own mind, in that whatever talents, whatever ability we have, whatever potential we have, we kind of only see it as what is inside that lane. Anything else outside that lane it's outside our wheelhouse. It's something that we're not able to do, and we never ever kind of think that we would have the potential to go in that direction. It used to always surprise me when I first got into self-publishing, and when it would maybe come up in conversation. At the time, I was a little bit shy about my writing. I would never really talk about it much. It was only when my wife might bring it up in conversation, when she'd be a little bit proud for me, and saying that I'd reached at least a couple of books, maybe in kids fiction or the romance fiction or whatever. And it was only kind of when that would come up in conversation the conversation would kind of stop at maybe the dinner table, and people would ask me questions saying, how do you do it? Is it hard to do? That I was maybe a little bit courageous to self-publishing a book, and, how did I cope with bad book reviews? And all these people would say, well, it's something I would love to do. I would love to be a writer, but I just don't have the confidence. I don't have the ability. I don't have this and I don't have that. And, a lot of those excuses were their minds kind of putting them in that kind of limited kind of bowling alley kind of mentality between the kind of bumpers. They would only see their life actually going down that kind of lane, and they could never ever have the ability to kind of step outside it. So it's funny when we actually look at our own potential. We either look at what we are doing right now, or we look at what we have done in the past, or we have looked at maybe what our parents have done, or our grandparents, or maybe people in our local area. And because we kind of see what we've done in the past, or the kind of limited things that our parents or whatever have done, we kind of categorize ourselves in that way, or we kind of limit our potential, in the same way that because it hasn't been done before, it's something we can't do in the future. But sometimes, if you do look back all the time and you've looked back to what the actions you've done before, it does kind of, make you kind of a lot smaller than you could be, and you're probably not living up to the potential you have right now. Now, if you have been listening to the podcast recently, I did go back through an old episode in that sometimes, rather than kind of looking back with nostalgia, sometimes, if we kind of want to grow, whether that's our business or maybe we are stuck in our business right now and we don't know where we should go, sometimes it does kind of pay off to maybe close your eyes and kind of mentally kind of project yourself into the future. What would the future version of you, what actions would they be taken? Maybe if you are going through a confused time at the moment, should you go down a certain route? How do you become a great blogger? How are you going to get out of maybe this kind of cul-de-sac, or that maybe you've written yourself into in your storybook or whatever. Maybe you're just kind of at a moment right now where you don't know what the next steps you need to take, and sometimes it does kind of pay off if you kind of mentally lift yourself out of where you are right now, project yourself in the future, and kind of look back from that future point to where you are at present, and maybe it might give you some kind of stepping stones or some kind of breadcrumbs that you can follow through to get through to where you are. So that's what I want you to think about today. As I said, not kind of looking back at your past, because when you look back at your past, you are going to look back at the things you've done before, and you're going to believe that because you've done those things in the past, those are the kind of things that you are going to be able to do in the future. But if you kind of consider some of probably the high moments when you did achieve something big in your life, there was one day that you weren't able to ride a bike, and then there was another day when you were able to ride a bike. Maybe when you were small, you fell off the bike loads and loads of times. You couldn't get your balance or whatever. But whatever happened one day, maybe your father or your mother was holding onto the back of your bike and ran down the road with you and let go. All of a sudden, you found you could cycle. And from that day forward, you had a belief in yourself that you could cycle. And because of that, then you kind of cycled in the future. Right? You mightn't have stayed on the bike for very, very long. You might have taken a couple of, pedals, and you might have wobbled a bit and you might have fell off. But you did make some progress on where you were. And as I said, there are kind of moments in our life where we weren't able to do something the day before and we were able to do it the next day. Even kind of learning to drive a car, which is probably another big achievement for a lot of us growing up as adults. There was one day where you weren't actually able to drive a car. Then there was probably the day when you passed the test, and from that test point onwards, you were able to drive the car, and you've probably been driving for many years since then. So for you to look back at that moment when maybe you couldn't ride the bike, or maybe you couldn't drive the car, and think that that is the way you're going to be in the kind of, for the rest of your life, it is a kind of limited way. That is, you're probably putting a big limit on the potential you have. So that's what I want you to think about today when it comes to your potential. Rather than looking back at how little you can do or what you can't do today, I want you to look forward and kind of open up that kind of, that kind of mental limit or whatever that you have on your mind, or maybe just kind of give yourself some credit that whatever you aren't what you aren't able to do right now, that's probably because, you have been looking back and maybe you haven't stretched yourself. Maybe you haven't tried to, find that untapped potential. As I'm doing these podcasts and, from the many years I have been into writing and self-publishing, it always amazes me how far I've come from where I have. When I was just simply a shelf stacker years ago, all the different talents I have learned. And if I did kind of keep looking at myself as just somebody who was a shelf stacker, or somebody who was just, didn't have any talent, couldn't write, couldn't talk, couldn't record videos, I wouldn't be where I am right now. So that's what I want you to do. If you do feel that you aren't talented, that you have a kind of limited potential, it's probably because you are looking back at what you've achieved in the past and you're carrying that kind of limited potential into the future, rather than realizing, like those big pivotal moments in your life where you learn to drive, you learn to ride a bike, or whatever skill you learn to do. There was one day when you weren't able to do it, and there is another day then when you were well capable to do it, and you have done it from then until now, and you probably haven't amazed yourself by overcoming whatever challenges you have, but your potential grew because you got over that hurdle. So stop looking at yourself in a small way. Stop thinking that you've only got a limited talent. You have probably far, far more potential than you have. As Randy said, a lot of us, unfortunately, are like that coach who kind of limit ourselves and think there's only a certain few people in the world that are destined to be great writers, or destined to be great bloggers, or fiction writers, or podcasters, or whatever, and we don't kind of put ourselves into that. But you never know what potential you have if you stick in the game, and if you kind of look forward and, stretch yourself and take on the extra actions you need to do, rather than looking back in your old achievements and kind of thinking that is the way it's got to be, every day of your future. So, as always, maybe I hope I've helped somebody someday. I hope I've helped somebody today maybe kind of lift off that mental kind of handbrake they have on their head, and maybe realize to themselves that maybe they have a lot more potential that they are not using, and to stretch themselves and see what else they can achieve, because you'll be really, really surprised what you can achieve when you put your mind to it. So, as always, if you'd like to reach out to me, you're very welcome to send an email to barryjmcdonald@gmail.com. Or if you'd like to know what I am doing over on the Writecom site, you can head over to Writecom, WRITECOME.com. You'll also find me on Facebook as well. If you want to do a search for Writecom, you'll find the Facebook page. And as always, if you enjoyed this podcast episode, I would really, really appreciate it. Maybe if you'd share it with a few friends, or if you want to leave a review or whatever, it'd be much, much appreciated. Or even just subscribe, and I will send all the next couple of episodes on to you. So as always, thanks for sharing your time again today, and take care. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us today. If you'd like more from the Writecom.com podcast, be sure to subscribe now for more tips, tricks, and ideas you can use to make more money from your words. See you in the next episode.